犯罪の名においてメイドの礼儀に気をつけます。きれいにしませんと。黒き翼よ、
取るに足らないわ。その命いただいたわ。歌よ錦となれよ。
Hello, so I've been playing Noelle for a while now and only recently managed to get her fully built. In this video, I would be going over a lot of the basic info on Noelle, such as her talents, weapons and artifact setups, but also talk about nice teams to run her in and have a nice discussion about her role in many of those teams. We'll also get into less straightforward stuff such as energy recharge and energy regeneration, which are actually really important if you want to get the most out of your Noelle. Most importantly though, I would like to point out what Noelle excels at, some things she struggles with, in both high and low investment builds, and her limitations in an attempt to equip you with a more holistic view on her and where she fits into the game. I would also like to share some of my personal experiences playing Noelle for almost a year now, and why I feel like she's a great addition to my playstyle and my account. Before we get into the guide, I would like to say that I will be trying to condense the guide as much as possible since there are already many great guides on YouTube that cover strategies surrounding building and playing Noelle in incredible detail, such as damage calculations in different setups, optimal rotations, animation cancelling, and so on. One guide that I especially recommend is by Krush SG. It's super informative and helped me a lot in my early days of playing Noelle. But honestly, most of the guides we have give generally good information on Noelle already. A lot of the stuff like her talents and builds I'll try to keep short, and really try to focus on answering some of the questions you might have around playing Noelle, and dive into her from a more team building, resource investment, and overall broader perspective regarding when you should or shouldn't consider building her, and what she can do for you if you choose to give her the proper resources. Anyway, I don't really want to repeat information, but I feel like I should still go over Noelle's skills and builds briefly to kinda lead us into my personal perspective later on, and it's also for anyone who just wants a quick recap. Let's start off with her talents. So her normal attack string does 4 hits. The first 3 hits do more of a AoE damage when you're in her alt state with the larger attack radius of her normal attacks. And the 4th hit does more of a single target damage, but it does much more damage than the rest of the other swings. It's a great skill and you should upgrade it if you want to maximize your Noelle's damage. Her E is more for like healing and shielding, so leveling your E increases your skill damage, which is the initial activation of the E, which is not much. Importantly, it increases the damage absorption, which lets you tank more, and also the healing triggering chance. Lastly, her ultimate just makes her sword really big. Nothing much to say here. It makes your sword big, gives you a bunch of attacks scaling off your defense, so it makes you hit harder, it makes you hit enemies in a bigger area. It has a 15-second duration and a 15-second cooldown, meaning you can have it up all the time if you have enough energy. It's a 60 energy cost, which isn't too much. It's not 80. It's a pretty moderate amount of energy. But see, here's the thing. Noelle's E does not generate energy particles, so whereas a lot of characters with 60 energy don't have super hard time getting their burst up on cooldown even with really low energy recharge, Noelle on the other hand will have a hard time, because she cannot generate energy particles, and we'll talk about that later. We'll talk more about it later. Her passive talent Devotion is actually really good. It saved my life a lot of times, especially when I run her on Hu Tao teams or teams with like really squishy carries. What it does is that it creates a shield for your character when your character falls below 30% HP, and it's actually stronger than her normal E skill shield, and also lasts longer. It lasts for 20 seconds, which is much longer than the 12 seconds of her E. That's nice. Nice and clean, decreases the cooldown of breastplate every 4 normal or charge attack hits. Cool. So it incentivizes you to use your attacks more during a sweeping time. Or even in general, or even without sweeping time, but Noelle without sweeping time when she attacks doesn't really do that much damage. So ideally you want your burst up all the time. That's all her aggressive talents. She's also really good at cooking defense food. Now moving on to constellations that actually tie in really closely with her talents. C1 is really good for her, especially her supporting capability. It makes it so that your healing becomes more consistent. You know you always get heals whenever you attack in your ultimate. Her C2 is great too, although a lot of your damage does not come from your charge attacks. So this doesn't really do much, but sometimes you want a charge attack. And I'll explain why later. C3 is increasing the level of your E, nice for supporting. C4 is nice little burst of damage whenever your E expires. And this skill can do really big numbers. C5 makes you a better damager, if that's a word, a DPS, yeah. C6 is the big one. It makes Noelle's skill better off defense, so it becomes a no-brainer to build defense on Noelle every single time. Before C6, for different reasons, you can go different builds, but for C6, Noelle, for healing and for damage, defense is the way to go. Additionally, it also increases the uptime of your ultimate if you're fighting and killing a lot of smaller or weaker enemies. This is not that good against bosses because if you kill the boss, he's dead, right? Anyway, it basically makes it so that your ult lasts for longer, which means to maintain 100% uptime on your ult, you require less energy recharge in a way. So that's kind of nice, really nice quality of life, really nice overall damage increase for Noelle as well. Because if you can get closer to 100% uptime on your ultimate, then that just means you do more damage. Nice. So, now let's go over the weapons. For weapons, starting off with 3 stars, anything goes really. Attack percent is nice, defense percent is nice, physical damage bonus if you don't have your ult up really often and you really want to run physical Noelle, all the more power to you. Elemental mastery on Noelle gives you stronger crystallized shields, I guess. It's a bit meme, but hey, go for it. I mean, I would say Noelle's pretty forgiving. HP or whatever, she has high defense already, may as well give her high attack, right? In early game you can build whatever, but I really recommend the White Iron Greatsword. It's a defense substat 3-star weapon, which I don't have actually. I obtained it from chests and I stupidly sold all of mine, and there's no more chests in my world to open. So I can't get it anymore. But hopefully you have it, and it'll be really good for healing on your Noelle, because healing is really valuable early game, right? But the real game changer is when you can get the White Blind. It's a craftable weapon so everyone can get it, and depending on how much you love Noelle and how much the game loves you, you can get it to refinement rank 5. This weapon synergizes really well with Noelle's normal attack oriented playstyle, and it's just generally good stats for her. Now, stuff like the Favonia's Greatsword and Sacrificial Greatsword are great too, right? Because if you think about her kit, and if you think back to when we're talking about her talents, energy recharge is actually really important, because to do more healing and to do more damage on her burst, you need to have your ultimate up. And one easy way to get your ultimate up more is to just have more energy recharge. And so Sacrificial Greatsword is great, also good for keeping your shield up more often. If Noelle's the only shielder in your team and you really need a shielder, this sword is okay. Favonia's Greatsword is also really good for Noelle because it gives her more energy recharge and also has a really nice passive which gives your team energy, which is really nice. Noelle's not the only one that needs energy, although in most cases she's the one who needs it more than others. Now, Serpent Spine is a really good one. If you're going a damage-oriented Noelle, this is the weapon to choose. Crit rate is always nice, valued on every character that's not called Kokomi. And it just lets you do more damage with the passive, right? It's great. Get it from the BP. Now, the Skyward Pride. On paper, this weapon does less damage than the Serpent Spine, which is a 4-star and you can guarantee it from the BP if you are willing to spend money. But its damage is all front loaded because of the passive. There's a really cool trick where you can just spam your charge attack and get your vacuum blades out really quickly. So the burst potential on this weapon is actually higher than the Serpent Spine, but overall has lower DPS. Although I prefer this weapon over the Serpent Spine because one, it just looks better on Noelle. I mean look at this. Battle maid with a huge glowy blue sword, yeah. Hell yeah. But also because of the energy recharge. When I think Noelle, I'm thinking comfy gameplay. When I'm thinking comfy gameplay, I'm thinking not always having to think super hard about funneling energy particles into your carry. Sometimes you just want to sit back and kill stuff and just hopefully get enough energy from that. Or like not have to super try hard with your team building and run a dedicated battery for her. A bit of energy recharge extra doesn't really hurt. Also, the Tuna Sword looks really good on her, but it increases elemental burst damage. It doesn't really increase the damage of her attacks in her ult because those are counted as normal attacks and charge attacks, not burst damage. Only the first 2 ticks of her burst here are considered burst damage, and that's like nothing compared to what she would do outside of these first 2 hits. So anything like the Noblesse Oblige set or the Luxurious Sea Lord Claymore will not give her more damage. So don't run this. Okay, before we move on, let's rapid fire some of the other weapons real quick. Koof's Gravestone is nice, not the best. Song of Broken Pines, lol. Unforged, looks pretty good on her, unfortunately, not the best weapon. Katsuragakiri Namagasa, Energy Recharge, nice. Black Cliff Slasher, crit damage, not bad. Snow Tomb Star Silver, meme. Lithic Blade, okay. Akuo Maru, meh. The Bell, lol. Royal Greatsword, lol. Rain Slasher, lol. Prototype Archaic, not bad, early game, with low Constellation Noelle. Now, talking about artifacts, you can either go for the Gladiator Finale or the Retracing Bowlight set. Both are really good, and they're basically even in terms of damage you deal. It's just that the Retracing Bowlight set gives you more charge attack damage as well, which the Gladiator does not give. Generally, you don't really want to be charge attacking with Noelle since it's a damage loss compared to her normal attack, but that's just something to keep in mind. Also, the Retracing Bowlight set used to be easier to farm than the Gladiator set, and that's still kinda true if you're farming the Retracing Bowlight domain. Now with the artifact Strongbox, you can farm literally any domain in the game and farm Gladiator at the same time, because if you get really bad artifacts from those other domains like HP main stats or flat HP, flat attack substats, you can just throw it into the artifact Strongbox and hopefully you roll a good Gladiator piece. Actually, 4 out of the 5 pieces I have here are gotten from the artifact Strongbox, and that's what really helped me finalize my Noelle build and really the reason I started playing her more. For a healer Noelle build, you can run 4 Maiden Beloved as the set. Personally think Noelle does enough healing to go through 99% of the game's content, and you should really just focus on damage, especially if you want to do the Spiral Abyss, since it's more of a damage check, not a healing check. Generally, for her artifact main stats, you would want to go with an attack percent timepiece for a C0 to C5 Noelle. But at C5, you can kind of consider going for a defense one already, because defense comes pretty close to attack percent in terms of how much damage it gives you, although attack percent is still better. But at C5, losing that a bit of attack percent in favor for defense, which makes your heals and shields much stronger, is definitely more viable than before C5, although you really do need those extra talent levels on your ult to make it so that the defense conversion starts to become more worth it for Noelle. And with C6, it is a no-brainer that you should just run a defense percent main stat timepiece, regardless of if you're going for a healer build or a damage build. For Goblet, you can either go defense percent or geo damage bonus. Geo damage bonus for more damage on Noelle, although defense comes close in the amount of damage you will deal with Noelle as well. But you get stronger heals and shields, so it's really up to you. Do you feel like your shield breaks too easily? Do you want to get a stronger shield? Do you feel like you need more heals? If so, go with defense. But I want to see my Noelle pump out as much damage as possible, plus I got good substats on this piece, so I'm going for the geo damage bonus piece. Lastly, a circlet. You just want to go crit rate or crit damage for a carry Noelle build. Unless you're going for once again a healer build, then you can go healing bonus or defense percent. But I'm going to go crit because I want damage. The substats you generally want to aim for are crit rate, crit damage, energy recharge, and defense percent in that order. Defense percent helps with your heals and shields. Energy recharge just makes it so that you have your ultimate more often. And crit damage is just responsible for making your damage numbers really high. And it's really what you want if you are into that carry Noelle life. Now that we've talked about her kit and general info surrounding how to build her, let's dive into the nuances of how to make the most out of your Noelle. This part is very important in my opinion, since Noelle can often feel clunky and even frustrating to play, and my hopes in this part is to give you enough information for you to paint a mental picture of what you can expect to get out of your Noelle on top of some of the hoops you need to jump through to get good results. I don't want to come across as a Noelle hater or anything. I genuinely enjoy playing and using Noelle in my teams. It's just that she isn't really that good, to put it frankly. And I'll explain what I mean in a bit. Also, keep in mind that the info in this section is structured and presented in a way to help you maximize your Noelle's potential, mainly for harder content like bosses or the Spiral Abyss where it's more needed. If you like playing Noelle and don't care about min-maxi kind of stuff, by all means, play her how you wish. However, there may be some information here that is still useful to know. One last thing before we get started. There are two kinds of Noelle. One is purely built for shields/heals, and this build is mainly focused on maximizing your defense percent and healing bonus stats. And the other is a more damage-oriented build build where you're trying to maximize Noelle's personal damage, mainly focusing on crit rate and crit damage, while still maintaining decent heals and shields. Both of these builds are played very similarly, and all the things I'm going to talk about will apply to both of them unless I mention a particular build specifically. Okay, so we know Noelle's strengths and what she's supposed to do in a team. Now let's talk about some of her weaknesses and hoops we need to jump through when building Noelle and considering her team compositions. I will use a numbered list for this. Number 1. Energy issues. You know how when most characters use the elemental skill, they generate these tiny energy particles of their own element? Yeah, Noelle doesn't do that, which causes problems since without energy, how will she fund her burst? So what we need to do with Noelle is funnel particles into her. This is done by using any other character's elemental skill and switching to Noelle while the particles are still in the air for Noelle to catch them. Something like this. And you preferably want a geo character since geoparticles provide more overall energy gain for Noelle than other elements. Noelle is very energy hungry, so she appreciates every extra bit of energy she can get. This is what we refer to as funneling or batterying, and is really important for Noelle since, like we mentioned earlier, Noelle has no reliable way of getting energy on her own. The importance of Noelle's burst cannot be understated. More specifically, the importance of having her burst up all the time, or at least most of the time. Sure, you can still provide your team shields and RNG gated heals with her elemental skill, but to really unlock her potential, especially as you progress later in the game, you really want to maximize your elemental burst uptime. Also keep in mind that all of her meaningful constellations are designed around her burst as well. Her C1 makes it so that the healing chance of her elemental skill is increased to 100% when you have your burst up, and her C6 basically gives you increased duration for your burst state and a pretty massive attack increase, which also indirectly buffs the damage her C2 and C4 offers. Basically, with some constellations, even at base, Noelle becomes a much better unit with her burst up, and without it, she just feels like a lackluster shield and heal bot with nothing more to her kit. Since unlike other characters, she can't even help trigger or set up meaningful reactions due to being Geo, which is why I consider energy generation and burst uptime to be Noelle's greatest obstacle and one that needs to be addressed first. Thankfully, this isn't super difficult to do so. Generally running one other Geo support unit to funnel particles into her, along with around 130% energy recharge, is enough to help her maintain her burst uptime if you're funneling particles into her perfectly. Although it can be a bit unrealistic for more casual gameplay, in that case you could aim for anywhere between 150% to 180% energy recharge to maintain her burst uptime more comfortably. To gain energy recharge, you can either look for it in your artifact substats, run an energy recharge weapon, or even an energy recharge timepiece, instead of an attack percent or defense percent one like I suggested earlier. Ultimately, how much energy recharge you need depends on your team comp, playstyle, and how efficient and willing you are to funnel particles into her, so you should try to tailor the amount of energy recharge to your own needs. However, it is really important that you get the right amount of energy recharge on your Noelle before anything else, since to me, Noelle doesn't even feel like half a character without her burst. Number 2. Split scaling. At every constellation level before C6, us Noelle players will have a tough choice to make. That is whether to go for a full support build by stacking a bunch of defense, or a fully offensive one by stacking attack. As mentioned earlier in the guide, this is due to the fact that Noelle's supportive capabilities are all tied to defense scaling, whereas maximizing her damage output requires you to build into attack stats. This all changes with her Constellation 6 though, since having it allows you to fully commit to defense over attack in her build. Since with how her C6 defense to attack stat conversion works, it essentially makes it so that 1 point of defense is more valuable than 1 point of attack, even in a purely offensive Noelle build, making it so that you can fully stack defense to maintain good shields and heals while also being able to deal good damage. Noelle only becomes a tank that can also do damage at C6, since before then you'll have to either choose one or the other. Be a glass cannon that doesn't even come close to the other damage dealers in terms of DPS, or be a shield and heal bot that does even less damage and can't even buff allies, debuff enemies, or enable reactions like every other healer can. C5 makes it so you can start to stack defense over attack more comfortably, but C6 is really what you want before considering playing Noelle unfortunately. I would say that she's one of the few constellation locked characters in Genshin. Not to say that you can't play her at all without constellations, just be aware that she might not be the tanky damage dealer you envision without her constellations. And so maybe I'm being a bit too hyperbolic, but this is the unfortunate reality of Noelle's kit and constellations to me. I just can't see how she can be comfortably played the way I like without her C6. Here's where I would try to offer a solution to the problem, but honestly, there really is none. If you don't have a C5 Noelle at least, I suggest building and having fun with other characters first before coming back to build her later on. I'm sure if you play for a while, you'll eventually roll on a rate up Noelle banner or get her from the standard banner. She even appears in the monthly Star Glitter shop sometimes. There really is no rush to build Noelle unless you really like her. And if you really like her, are you gonna let some guy on the internet tell you not to? I started building my Noelle when she was only C4, so I certainly didn't. And number 3, field time. Let's talk about healer Noelle first. There are other reasons too, but one of the main reasons why Noelle is often considered the worst healer in the meta tier list is because she is currently the only healer in the game that demands field time to heal. That is to say that she can't heal without being on the field using her normal attacks on enemies. Sure, some other healers like Barbara and Kokomi can be on the field, normal attacking to heal allies too, but they have abilities outside that can be left on the field to heal, or press and instantly heal everyone in the party, both of which require next to no field time. So why is requiring field time to heal such a big deal? In the current difficult content, we are trying to kill enemies within certain time limits, and so the consistent damage our characters are able to output matters, with heals and shields being less important as a result. Attacking with a healer that has a kit whose value is split between healing, shielding, and damaging will undoubtedly be much less efficient than attacking with a top tier character with a kit designed purely to do damage. In other words, switching off your main DPS character in order to normal attack a bunch of times with Noelle to heal is really bad if you want to maximize your team's damage output. A more damage-oriented Noelle build runs into this problem as well, since Noelle's damage dealing potential frankly just isn't as high as the more popular DPS units, which I probably don't even need to mention the names of. I think this is fair considering that Noelle is a hybrid unit who wasn't designed solely to do damage. In fact, it would be kind of absurd if Noelle could heal, shield, and do top tier damage at the same time. On top of that, the problem of Noelle requiring high field time remains prevalent here. Anyway, so this is how we can try to work around these weaknesses. Considering that Noelle requires field time to gain her maximum value, pairing her up with characters that also require a lot of field time will lessen the overall team's damage output. These characters are characters such as Razor and Xiao, who like Noelle are often required to have long periods of on-field time, hitting enemies to get any sort of value. They have little to no supportive capabilities, and their kits were built purely to do damage on field. These characters aren't bad, in fact they are really good at doing their job. However, any time spent on them over Noelle will mean that Noelle isn't getting much value since she isn't the one on the field hitting things. And likewise, if Noelle is the one attacking on field, these other characters that require field time will be sitting there and contributing nothing to the team's overall damage output. This is why we should avoid running these types of characters with Noelle. Instead, I would suggest running off-field damage dealers to attack alongside Noelle, who contribute to the team's damage output on top of what Noelle is already providing on field. You could probably already have guessed from the background footage by now, but I love pairing characters like Xingqiu and Fischl with Noelle. As for why, let's talk more about that right now. Let's start off with Noelle's Geo batteries or supports, since you'll almost always want to run one in her teams. Ningguang is a really good battery, especially at C2. It has quick and high burst damage with her E into Q combo. She can also serve as the on-field damage dealer when Noelle doesn't have a burst up. When paired with Noelle, she unlocks Geo Resonance, which increases your shield strength and provides a party-wide damage buff when your character is shielded. Albedo is a really good battery as well. He requires very little field time and provides consistent and reliable off-field damage. I would say that he is simpler to use in comparison to other Geo supports, since his E doesn't generate energy particles instantly upon cast, but instead does over time when he hits enemies. So you can just collect the energy particles when you're on field doing damage with Noelle, as opposed to having to funnel particles into her like Ningguang does. He also enables Geo Resonance. Zhongli is a good battery too. His elemental skill particle generation works like Albedo's too, so you'll have to make sure that you fight around his E structures in order for it to damage enemies and generate particles. Zhongli also offers the strongest shield in the game, paired with a high damage, crowd controlling ult, which makes already comfy Noelle gameplay even more comfy. He also enables Geo Resonance. The Geo main character is a good battery with high burst damage coming from her E and her Q. Unlike Albedo and Zhongli, the main character has to funnel energy into Noelle like Ningguang does. Also, it might take some time to get used to playing around Geo MC structures that they create on the battlefield, since the structure may get in the way sometimes. But after a while of playing MC, you'll instinctively know how to play around it, and even use the created terrain to your advantage. Geo Resonance here as well. And I keep mentioning Geo Resonance because it's genuinely a really good buff that not only increases Noelle's personal damage, but also the damage of her supports, which is pretty big since most of Noelle's supports are focused around doing damage, and so you get a lot of value from this resonance. Honestly, any of these Geo characters mentioned here can serve as good batteries for Noelle, with none strictly being superior to the others. It is just up to what characters you have or what kind of rotations and playstyle you prefer. Now moving to the other characters that have great synergies with Noelle. Fischl is a fantastic single target damage dealer that requires little to no field time, which makes up for Noelle's long field time requirements and lack of single target damage. She provides pretty solid off-field energy regeneration as well. Her elemental skill works similarly to Albedo's and Zhongli's and provides pretty solid energy generation too. And even though she doesn't generate geoparticles, the small bits of energy she provides can add up. Xingqiu is a fantastic single target damage dealer that, like Fischl, requires little to no field time, which makes up for Noelle's weaknesses. He also pairs well with Fischl to further increase single target damage and gain access to the Electro Charge reaction, which helps improve AoE damage as well. Additionally, the rain swords from his burst provide damage reduction, which makes Noelle's already hard to break shield even tankier. Rosaria is mainly here for crit rate sharing. She can share up to 15% crit rate with her whole party after she casts her elemental burst. She also gives you access to Cryo Resonance when paired with another unit to give you a further increase in crit rate when attacking an enemy affected by Cryo by another 15%. Your characters basically gain another 15% crit rate this way. On top of that, she provides a decent AoE damage with her burst as well. Overall, a really solid unit to pair with Noelle. Kea is also here for Cryo Resonance. He doesn't require much field time and does decent off-field damage with his burst as well. A very straightforward and solid pick. Ganyu is here for the same reasons as Kea. She provides Cryo Resonance and big off-field AoE cryo application with decent damage. She also provides a taunt with her E, which can be pretty neat. Bennett is here too, unsurprisingly. He gives a huge attack buff that increases everyone's damage, and when paired with one more Pyro unit, he gives you access to Pyro Resonance, which further increases everyone in the team's attack by an additional 25%. His burst can infuse your characters with Pyro to cleanse debuffs, and he has healing too, to make your Noelle comfy gameplay even more comfy. However, the healing is less valuable in Noelle's teams, since Noelle herself already heals enough. You usually only run Xiangling with Bennett, since she has a high damage burst that's easier to use off cooldown with Bennett in the party, due to it having a high energy cost of 80. She does very good off-field AoE pyro damage, and running her with Bennett will give Pyro Resonance as well. Sarah gives a big attack buff similar to Bennett, although hers is slightly inferior to Bennett's. She can do big burst damage as well though, and doesn't require much field time. Lisa is here for her defense shred from her second ascension passive, which is actually pretty valuable, and can provide off-field AoE electro damage. But you kinda need her C4. So good luck to all of us trying to get Lisa Constellations, I guess. Beidou does good AoE damage, especially when facing two enemies. Not more, not less. Since I heard the damage numbers of her burst becomes pretty insane with how her lightning bounces. Her E can offer a quick burst of pretty nice damage as well. Okay, now we're getting a bit into more personal preference slash situational picks. And first off is Kazuha or Sucrose. Really, this pick is just to group enemies to maximize Noelle's AoE damage. These units can do decent damage with swirls as well, but Noelle teams generally won't take advantage of the elemental damage bonus or EM buffs that they give respectively, as well as the 4-piece Viridescent Venera resistance shred, since Geo can't be swirled by Anemo. Still good units to group up enemies for Noelle though. Although I would say Kazuha is the superior option here, since his suction is really strong and he personally provides better damage than Sucrose, which is very valuable in the Noelle team since Noelle's teams generally kinda lack damage and her supports are just there kinda just to make up for it. Also, it's not that Sucrose doesn't really work well for this purpose, however the way her ult groups enemies makes it so that Noelle's attacks can sometimes miss them even if Noelle is within range. Also, her sucking power isn't really as strong as Kazuha's. And the reason I'm not recommending Venti is that he just doesn't work well here due to Noelle not being able to hit the enemy suspended in the air by Venti's burst using her normal attacks. And lastly, we have Raiden. So this is a more niche pick, I'm very aware of that. But I think you can run Raiden that's built 100% for damage in a Noelle team. He used to be run in a dual carry Noelle comp, such as Noelle, a Geo support, Raiden, and then Bennett for example. Similar to Noelle, Raiden is another carry that heavily relies on her burst to do damage, so you can run her alongside Noelle and alternate between using Noelle's burst and Raiden's when it isn't. Raiden's elemental skill also provides small off-field damage, in addition to a burst providing energy for Noelle whenever Raiden attacks in her electro-infused state. It provides a nice amount of energy for Noelle, but by no means replaces a dedicated Geo battery in your team if you want to get a 100% burst uptime for Noelle. Although it is still nice and maybe gives you more leeway in building energy recharge on Noelle or battering her in your rotations. Overall, she's a nice character to run with Noelle, maybe not the most optimal, but I personally enjoy playing them on the same team. So now that we know what these individual characters can offer to Noelle, let's talk about them in a team setting as we go over some example team compositions and how they can be played. Okay, so the first team consists of Geo support, Fischl, and Xingqiu. Along with Noelle, of course. All these teams include Noelle. I'm just not gonna say Noelle every time. This team aims to maximize your single target damage. I use it mostly against bosses or enemies with a lot of HP. The electro charge reactions that Fischl and Xingqiu create together are really effective against smaller enemies as well. Overall, a really balanced team and definitely one of my favorites for Noelle. Next, we have Geo support, Rosaria, Kea, or Ganyu. This team is pretty straightforward, increased crit rate for everyone in addition to raw cryo damage from your supports. Pretty fun to play in my opinion. Next, Geo support, Xiangling, and Bennett. First and foremost, this team focuses on maximizing Noelle's personal damage output with Bennett's potent attack buff alongside Pyro Resonance. And on top of that, it outputs really strong AoE damage with Xiangling's burst paired with Noelle's attacks. It is a fantastic team if you can get all your burst up consistently, but you'll have to share the amount of battering time between Noelle and Xiangling since they are both energy hungry characters. Xiangling has a burst cost of 80 and you'll need to build ER on her as well as funnel particles toward her using Bennett. Geo support Kazuha or Sucrose, Bennett or Sarah. The whole idea of this team is to maximize the AoE potential of Noelle's attacks by grouping enemies together. And so with that said, it only gets its full value when facing multiple enemies who can be crowd controlled by our Animo unit. You can slot anyone into the last slot really. It just depends on what you need, but I think an attack buffing character like Bennett or Sarah is a safe pick here. And then we have Geo support Raiden, Bennett, Sarah. We already talked about how Raiden could work well with Noelle in the other previous sections, so I won't go into much detail here. But I just wanted to put it out there that this is a team that could be run with Noelle, and just depends on whether you like the rotations and playstyle of it, since you'll really only be attacking with Noelle half of the time at most, and it is as much of a Raiden team as it is a Noelle team. The last character slot can be once again filled however you like, depending on what content you're facing. You can also try out some weirder stuff like double Electro and Sing Chu for a full-on Electro charge team, with Noelle being the main driver of it, provided you have enough ER. I mean, have fun with team building, just mix and match depending on what you need. Do you need more energy particle generation? Maybe some more damage buffs? Or maybe you need off-field damage and reactions? It really depends on what you're trying to achieve with your team composition. The aim of this guide is not to tell you what to build, but to give you enough info so you can tailor the builds and team comps to your own preferences. Also, before we move on, I would like to say that you would generally need to have other units in your team pretty well built to support Noelle and make up for her lack of damage. Since they aren't reaction enablers like Sing Chu in a Hu Tao team, where his only job is to apply Hydro using his burst and doesn't even need to build damage. On the other hand, since Noelle cannot perform any meaningful reactions, supports in Noelle teams are generally there to provide raw elemental damage, so they would need to be given proper weapons, artifacts, talent levels, and so on. This is why Noelle teams are pretty expensive to build. Also, Noelle is suggested to be run with a damage-focused build in all of the teams I listed. Running Noelle who has inherently low damage is already an opportunity cost lost to your teams, and without being able to output at least decent damage, it is really hard to justify playing her. So in the same vein, I didn't suggest these teams with support Noelle in mind, since support Noelle can be put in any team that needs a healer or shielder and doesn't have much synergies or use outside that unfortunately. If you have literally any other healer, you should probably run them on your teams instead of Noelle. There are a few specific scenarios where healer or carry Noelle could be the best unit for you to run though, and once again, you can just run Noelle in every team if you like her. However, this next little section of the guide will be centered around clearing harder content like the Spiral Abyss, where you'll have to work with limited resources and characters. So when would you ever run a pure healer Noelle? You would build and play a healer Noelle if you want a healer or shielder that also provides Geo Resonance, usually if you don't own Zhongli. If you don't have any other healers, maybe you are running them in the other Abyss team. If you don't have any other shielders, maybe you are running them on the other Abyss team too. If you need a 2-in-1 healer or shielder and don't have Diona, or are already running her on the other Abyss team. If you already have a bunch of defense % main stat artifacts which you are not using, ideally with substats like energy recharge and a bit of crit rate and crit damage. So I think what my point really is here is that there are so many better options over Noelle, and she's really the last choice when it comes to meta. So you should really just play her if you like her, or if building her is convenient to you. So Noelle's damage focused build is pretty scuffed, quite expensive to build, and runs into a lot of problems like mentioned earlier. But I do think that there are definitely more scenarios where this build is viable compared to her healing alternative. So here are some scenarios in which you would want to run a more damage focused Noelle build. You would run a more damage focused Noelle build if you are at a stage of the game where you personally prefer comfort and ease of use over a potentially higher damage carry. For example, if you don't have trouble clearing Abyss in time and just want a more comfy experience doing so. If you don't like running a healer that doesn't do damage for some reason, and prefer one that can also do damage alongside healing. If you want a character that, when built well, can be a solution to everything, since she provides healing, shielding, and AoE damage, she's quite versatile. So you won't have to think about changing your team often, since the only thing she's useless against is geo-immune enemies. If you enjoy being able to sit back, relax, and store your brain in the closet while playing her, since her gameplay is pretty straightforward and doesn't rely on elemental reactions, allowing you to just unga bunga kill stuff in its purest form. I certainly love this aspect of playing Noelle, and it's a huge part of why I decided to fully invest into her in the first place. If you have resources already laying around and have her supports already built, in that case it is pretty easy to start getting value from Noelle immediately. So now we're sort of entering the tips and tricks section of the guide. It's just kind of like a garage sale of stuff that I couldn't fit in earlier that could be somewhat helpful to you, I don't know. So the first tip is to do with her attack strings. I mentioned it briefly at the start of the guide, but you should use your 3 attack string against many enemies to maximize the area your attacks cover. Only ever use the 4th hit of your normal attack string when fighting a single target or want to do more damage to an enemy directly in front of you without caring about the surrounding enemies. You can see me do it here when I intentionally use the 4th hit whenever the samurais are in front of me, since they are tankier than the treasure hoarders to the side, and I will have eventually needed to focus them down anyway if I purely use the 3 attack strings AoE damage to finish off the treasure hoarders first. So it saves time overall by mixing the 3 and 4 attack string hits to try and kill them all at the same time. I may have made it sound a bit complicated, but I'm sure you'll naturally get the hang of it the more you play Noelle. A quick tip for healing is that you can hold your Noelle's charge attack to heal fast, since you heal per hit, and Noelle's charge attack hits much faster than her normals. So that's something that you can do when you need fast and potent healing. Do keep in mind that even when running something like a Bolite set, which increases your charge attack damage, this will be a DPS loss compared to when you're using your normal attack hits. You can animation cancel her attacks using her E activation, which is pretty useful for mining, I do it a lot. I mean, saves like 0.1 milliseconds. The min-max life, am I right? Speaking of rotations, don't use your E before your ult since you're losing valuable shield time in doing so. This is different from other characters since other characters like to press E into Q usually to catch the energy particles generated by their skill during their burst animation, but Noelle doesn't generate particles, so there's no real reason to do it, and I feel like some people may do it out of habit, I don't know, sometimes I do it out of habit, but you really shouldn't be doing it since you can really take advantage of her ult's iframes to ignore damage before casting your shield. This may seem pretty insignificant, right? And maybe it is, but gaining that few extra seconds of shield time on Noelle could be the difference between a 4th hit on your normal attack landing and being hit, getting staggered by the enemy, and have your 4th hit swing not go through. So yeah, this tip may seem small, but you might see that saving that few extra seconds on your shield adds up over time. But of course, there are certain scenarios where you're like literally about to die, and so casting your shield instantly before your ult could be better than, I mean it depends, right? But it's just something to keep in mind. So another thing to consider regarding Noelle's elemental skill, again, is that you don't have to cast it off cooldown since you aren't a squishy DPS character like Ganyu or Klee, since I assume you're stacking defense or at least have a defense timepiece if you're C5 or above. So you can kinda tank and get hit and it isn't gonna be the end of the world. This means you can be more selective with using your E. Maybe save it for when a heavy attack is about to hit you, or when you're in a tight spot. Usually though, you could want to use your E skill to gain a shield so that Geo Resonance comes into play, but often you'll find that you'll have crystallized shields on the floor for you to just pick up from your Geo attacks hitting enemies already infused with the elements of your support's attacks. And crystallized shields do activate Geo Resonance. Okay, so a lot of this talk has just been about attack animations and rotations and stuff. To summarize, my attack rotation, the one I personally feel comfortable with, is normal attack into ult, into normal attack, into shield, into a 3 or 4 normal attack string, depending on the enemy, or charge attack at the end for fast heals. To be honest, I don't know how to calculate her, so I don't know if this is her most optimal rotation. It is just what I find the most natural and comfortable for me. So I thought I'd show my Noelle build at this point in the video, to share the stats my Noelle has been running in the footage you've been seeing. I actually have a few Noelle builds, but first let me show you my main one and the one I run 95% of the time for both the Spiral Abyss and the Overworld. So for my main Noelle build, she has 1436 attack, 1776 defense, 0 elemental mastery, which is nice since it's a wasted stat on her, 66 crit rate, 151 crit damage, and also 179 energy recharge. She has 179% energy recharge, which is on the high side of how much Noelle needs. The reason I run this much of Noelle is because I really value elemental burst uptime on her, as you can probably tell from the guide. Having this much just makes it easier to maintain a 100% uptime on her burst in any situation, be it against a group of enemies or a single boss. Having this much energy recharge is definitely just for comfort, and my Noelle would do more damage while still maintaining good burst uptime if some of the energy recharge stats were allocated into crit rate and crit damage instead. She also gets a 46.6% geo damage bonus from her geo damage goblet. I almost always run her on the Skyward Pride due to its nice energy recharge substat, and the small burst potential its passive offers, but mainly because it just looks cool on Noelle. Now let's take a look at her artifacts. Starting off with the flower, feather, timepiece, goblet, and circlet. I think this is the build my Noelle will stick with for the foreseeable future, since I've stopped going for gladiator pieces in the artifact Strongbox, and even if I did, it would be pretty hard to get upgrades over the current pieces I'm running. And yeah, I got all these gladiator pieces for Noelle from the artifact Strongbox, and I'll explain why I keep mentioning this later. My Noelle is Constellation 6 and actually my first C6 character. And her talents are 10, 11, 12. I especially crown her attack just to push her damage potential that tiny bit further. I also switched to the Serpent Spine when I'm going for a tankier Noelle build that provides more heals, since when I do this, it lets me not run a crit rate circlet and instead I could run a defense percent one. My overall stats aren't really changed that much, although my attack does go down to 1225, but my defense increases to 2136. Noelle's crit rate and crit damage here still stays pretty similar compared to the other build due to running the crit rate weapon, but her energy recharge does drop, although it's still at an acceptable level at 151. Now let's talk about the artifact Strongbox. I personally think that this system is a lifesaver when farming for Noelle, since in my opinion, Genshin isn't as much a game about building individual characters, but more a resource investment game where you're trying to strengthen your account as a whole. With this perspective in mind, Noelle isn't generally a good character to farm artifacts for unless you're going for Maiden's Noelle, since her options are either to farm world bosses and get a 50% chance at a gladiator piece for 40 resin, or to farm the retracing bolite domain that also has a 50% chance of dropping the right set. The retracing bolite set can only really be used as a 4-piece set and isn't widely used as other sets like the Emblem or Severed Fate set. And the Archaic Petra set is currently only really run as a 2-piece set, and the characters that use it are really limited. This domain isn't really resin efficient to farm since you could be farming other domains like, once again, the Emblem and Shimenawa's domain or the Blizzard Strayer and Heart of Debon. I feel like this is what really put me off building Noelle in the past, since I was still struggling to get stars in the Abyss and would rather invest resin into building more useful supports or upgrading the artifacts on my hyper carry units. However, this has all changed with the artifact Strongbox, since we now can farm artifacts for our hyper carries and supports, all while accumulating a set on the side for Noelle. And of course, the Strongbox doesn't just offer one set. You might favor going for the Wanderers or Noblesse set instead. However, I personally went hard on the Gladiator set while farming the Emblem domain the moment the system came out, since although it might not be their best in slot set, the 4-piece Emblem set can almost be used on every character, while the 2-piece Shimenawas paired with 2-piece Gladiator set can also be very strong as a universal set combo. It's pretty hard to lose when you're farming this way. Okay, I went on a small tangent there, but what I'm saying is that Noelle is a character that you can farm for on the side this way, all while not really hurting the build progress of other characters that maybe you like more or are more competitive in the Abyss. While farming for Noelle, you may get some good gladiator pieces for many of your other characters too, compared to farming the Bolite domain, where even if you get good pieces, it's less widely used and thus offers less value to your account overall. So artifact Strongbox OP basically. Genshin isn't a game about a single character, so I think it's good to sometimes take a step back and consider things from a broader perspective. Yo, I appreciate you making it this far into the video. I don't know who would watch a 40-minute long Noelle video, but if you're here, thank you. At first, I was only planning to make a 10 to 15 minute long one, but the more I worked on it, the longer it got, and now we're here. If you enjoyed hearing me go on about Noelle for the better part of an hour now, maybe you'll enjoy hanging out with me on Twitch, where I stream Genshin Impact every day. I only stream one game because I only play one game. Anyway, I hope you found the video informative, and let's end the video with a Noelle montage. Enjoy, and take care.